Hi friends, I'm in the raised bed garden today because I am going to plant my potatoes. It's about 3 to 4 weeks before my average last frost date, which is a great time to get your potatoes in the ground. Let's go over a little bit about how to prepare your soil for potatoes, how to plant them, how to grow them on, and when to harvest. So potatoes are grown from what are called seed potatoes. Seed potatoes are not actually seed. There's no seed involved in growing potatoes. It's actually just last year's potato that's held over, stored, and then you do something called chitting. The process of chitting is getting these little eyes to sprout. And you can see this one here is a good example. It has 3 eyes, and that's what's going to grow and become the plant. You can also just grow potatoes from potatoes that you purchase at the grocery store. Typically, you want to go with organic potatoes because your conventionally grown potatoes are usually sprayed with a sprout inhibitor so that they don't sprout these eyes. Organic potatoes are not sprayed with that. Occasionally, you'll have conventionally grown potatoes that still sprout. And if you have some old potatoes in your pantry that have sprouted eyes, do not throw them out. You can absolutely throw them in the garden and grow some potatoes. So the reason you might consider going with a seed potato that you purchase from a nursery or online is because they are going to be true to their variety and absolutely not sprayed with that sprout inhibitor. So let's say you purchase potatoes that do not yet have eyes. Mine were purchased and arrived a couple weeks ago, and I just left them in my garage, and within 2 weeks they sprouted eyes and they are ready to go in the soil. If you have potatoes that you want to plant that don't yet have eyes, you need to chit your potatoes. It's called chitting. So basically what you want to do is you want to force them to sprout these eyes. And the way you can do that is you can just put them in some sort of tray, a seed tray, plate, anything like that. You don't need soil, just space them out so they're not touching. Cover them with a very slightly damp towel and just wait. So what causes them to sprout is the ambient air humidity. It's not soil humidity. Soil humidity can actually, soil moisture can cause them to rot. So it's really easy if you just keep a damp towel over them, check it every day, make sure it stays damp, and that humidity in the air that that damp towel is creating, and as long as they're not touching and they have airflow all around them, they will sprout the eyes. So after your potatoes have sprouted and you have eyes, you can actually divide them. You can cut them so that you have 2 to 4 eyes on each potato slice. You don't want to go too small. I would say anything bigger than a golf ball is a great size. But like, for example, this potato here, right now we have 3 eyes sprouted. I very easily could cut this between these 2 eyes. You let it heal for 24 to 48 hours before planting it, just so there's not a raw wound there for moisture to get in. And then you can plant this out as 2 separate potatoes, one with 2 eyes and one with 1 eye. And the reason you want to do that, I don't really have any good examples right here, but if you have a potato with like 5, 6, 7 eyes on it, you definitely want to split that potato up. Ideally, you want between 2 and 4 eyes on each potato because each of these eyes will become a plant of its own. So when do you plant potatoes? You can go about 3 to 4 weeks before your last frost date, all the way up until late spring. Potatoes can actually tolerate fairly cool weather. Foliage of a potato cannot handle frost, but generally when you plant these potatoes, they're going to be completely covered underground, and it's going to take several weeks before that foliage reaches the surface, and chances are it's going to be after your last frost date before that happens. Where do you plant your potatoes? You want to pick a spot that gets at least 6 hours of sun a day, and typically they are best grown in containers or raised bed situations because you can control your soil. Potatoes really need a light, lofty, really soft soil because they're forming those tubers underground. If they are met with a lot of resistance from compacted or hard soil, those tubers aren't going to grow as large. So you want a really light, fluffy soil. What I recommend before you plant, what I'm going to do, and I will show you, is I'm going to go in here and really just turn over the soil. It's pretty light and lofty as it is, but I'm just going to take my garden fork and really get in there and just work the soil. Something to keep in mind about where you plant your potatoes is you do need to do crop rotation. So don't plant them in the same location or in the same soil that you planted them in the previous year. And that's just going to help prevent a lot of diseases from year to year. Another thing to keep in mind when choosing a location for your potatoes is what grows well with potatoes. Some companion plants for potatoes are cabbages, your spinach, leafy greens. Some things you don't want to plant near your potatoes are any squashes or tomatoes. Potatoes are a very heavy feeder. So what that means is they really benefit from a lot of fertilizer. I'm gonna amend my soil. It already has compost in it from last year that was very fresh. So I'm not gonna add any more compost, but I am gonna amend it with worm casting, some organic slow release, just general garden vegetable fertilizer, and then also some blood meal. And then I would recommend feeding your potatoes at least once a month after you plant them because they are such heavy feeders. So in this bed, I have some lettuce and other leafy greens, and then I'm gonna fill this bed with potatoes. All right, so first let's prepare the soil. I'm gonna get in here with my garden fork and really turn up the soil, loosen it up, and then I'm gonna add in all my amendments. This is actually a roofing fork is what I think it's called, but it's what I use to loosen up my soil. Okay, so you can see I have the soil all loosened up. I'm just going to sprinkle all of my amendments over the soil, and then I'll work them in to mix them into the soil. It's just a little homemade measuring stick that I use. Each black mark represents 1 inch. So it's marked off all the way to 1 foot. Then I have 18 inches and 2 feet. So potatoes want to be planted about 4 to 6 inches deep. And I have 7 different varieties of tomatoes. So I'm going to do 7 rows all the way down. I'm just going to use this little handheld hoe to make my trenches. Putting about a foot in between each row. This year I'm growing 7 different varieties. So let's make my labels. First up, I have Russet Burbank. I'm doing a Red Norland. Doing a good old Yukon Gold. I'm doing a Canela Russet. A Corolla. Doing Kennebec. And lastly, Yukon Gem, which is a Yukon Gold variety. I want to grow the gold and the gem and just compare them because the gem has some attributes that the traditional Yukon Gold doesn't. So I'm curious to see if I get a better performance from the Yukon Gem. I have each of my rows spaced from center to center about a foot apart, which is what you want. And then my soil level is right there at about 5 inches. So when planting your potatoes, you want to plant the potato with the eyes facing up. So what I will do is I will plant this one right here in the ground and just cover it up. So for me, I fudge a little, and while my rows are a foot apart, I tend to plant within my row a little bit closer, like maybe about 8 inches apart. I'm just going to cover them over. One thing you're going to want to do when your potato has about a foot of leafy growth above the ground, you're going to want to do what's called hilling. And you're going to come in with like a hoe, or you can use your hands and just gather the dirt up towards the center of that leafy growth. What that's going to do is that's going to prevent any potato tubers from being exposed to the sunlight, which of course causes our potatoes to turn green, which we don't want. So that way you'll just hill them. And you can do that 1 or 2 times as they're growing. I generally only do it once. But if you do start to notice some of your potatoes peeking up above the ground, they're clumping up right above the ground, you can just cover them with a little soil to prevent them from turning green. All right, 1 row down, 6 more to go. So if you come across any of your potatoes, especially ones that you have sprouting in your pantry or that you keep over from last year's harvest that look like this, you can absolutely still plant them. This is a red Norland from my last year's harvest, and I actually brought them out of storage too soon, so they sprouted quite a while ago. And you can see the potatoes are already starting to shrivel up, but I'll plant this whole thing in the ground and just lay it on its side and let a little bit of this foliage peek up above ground. Just like that. And then it'll get buried like that. So don't be afraid to plant these even if you have some really long sprouts. They'll still grow. One thing to note though is you don't want to break your eyes. Be very careful when you're planting your potatoes. You don't want to break this off, and you don't want to break any of the other eyes. So you can just plant these a little deeper or lay them on their side. Either works fine. While it may not be ideal to have such long sprouts, more than likely they will do just fine. You can see in here, this is my russet Burbank. They all are equally as long and sprouted. Goodness, look at some of these. Wild. Here they are, all planted up. You can see those ones with the really long sprouts are sticking up above the ground just a little bit. So remember, when they are about 12 inches of leafy growth above the ground, come back and hill your potatoes to make sure you prevent the greening. Remember to fertilize at least once a month. All right, so they're all tucked in. I'm not going to water them in because we are going to get some rain in the next couple of days, and I do not want to risk rotting my potatoes. The water needs when you initially plant them are pretty low. You do not want to overwater and have really soggy, wet soil because the potato will rot. So think more like a light moisture to it. So if you don't have rain in your forecast, you can water them in, just get the soil just a little bit moist, but do not drown them. So about harvesting, you're going to want to look at your days to maturity to give you an estimate on when they're going to be ready. But generally with potatoes, it's around 100 to 120 days with most varieties. You know it's time to harvest when the foliage turns yellow and just looks like they're dying. You think something's wrong, but it's just their life cycle. So that's a good indicator of when your potatoes are ready. You can go in and harvest all throughout the season after about 2 months and get like little new potatoes, and you can just, grab a few and cook them up for dinner. But your true big potato harvest won't be until all that foliage dies back. So keep an eye out for that. All right, that's a wrap on planting potatoes. If you have any questions, put them in the comments below. I'm about to head inside, get washed up. I really appreciate you watching. Thanks for gardening with me today. So they are certified. Woo! So what? All this wind.